discuss the pipeline a bit?
Well, it's really interesting that we continue to develop more and more therapies for MS, and right now there are several interesting monoclonal antibodies, and I think what they potentially offer is even improved efficacy. Obviously, the issue is going to be the risk-benefit ratio and exactly how safe they are, but there's a monoclonal in front of the FDA right now, alemtuzumab. There are two others that are in studies, ocrelizumab, an anti-CD20, and daclizumab. Then there are a whole bunch of, let's say, modifications of some of the agents that we already have that may have better safety profile or specificity. And then development, and it's at an earlier stage, but as I said before, a huge lack is we have no treatments for the progressive form of MS. We have no CNS repair, restorative therapies, and we're beginning to see trials, albeit preliminary trials, for potential treatments for progressive MS and CNS repair. And obviously, particularly the CNS repair is driven by much more than just MS. That's something that would be vital to virtually all major neurologic diseases.
Right, so there's a couple of trials of secondary progressive MS, pivotal trials, and a couple for primary progressive MS. So we have the hope of having some therapies available for progressive disease. The other interesting thing about the pipeline is that the studies have transitioned more towards comparative efficacy, which I think you guys will find welcome, in that there are active comparators in most of the trials that are in the pipeline now, and a couple that are already finished. So there's more and more, and for us this is very useful because we need comparative efficacy data, but it's also an ethical issue for us because we have a hard time doing placebo-controlled trials, at least in relapsed remitting MS. Although there are some regulatory authorities, not here, that want both an active comparator and a placebo, and that scientifically is a wonderful design, but ethically is very difficult to do. But the idea of comparative efficacy is moving forward, and I think we'll have more and more studies that have that information. So that'll help us to stratify the agents, but it doesn't tell us who and when to start what agent. And this is going to get to the biomarker issue that Dr. Coil brought up, because we're not very good yet at prognosticating early MS. It's a very variable disease, the most variable of the serious neurologic diseases, and yet some people go along and do just great, and other people do very poorly. And until we can really stratify them early on when we're making the diagnosis, it's going to be hard to choose whether you go to a high efficacy, high risk agent versus something more proven and with very good safety. You agree?
Absolutely, and that's really where having biomarkers would be so meaningful. We can create a prognostic profile, but the problem is it's far from 100%.
And so I don't know if this pipeline is going to help you or not, because it's going to just mean more agents out there without necessarily providing you with what you've asked us for, which is an algorithm or a guideline.
Right. Now, there is the potential for more we'll almost use the word confusion, you know, which patient gets which drug for which reasons, and until we have some of those abilities to be more predictive, I think it's going to get more confusing. You talk about monoclonal antibodies, you know, on one hand, we might be migrating from patient self-injectable therapy to oral therapies, but then if the MCAs show, you know, promise will be then, will the oral period be somewhat transient, and we'd be migrating back to use of monoclonal antibodies, and you know, and then multiple therapies. I mean, Leslie raised that. We do get requests for multiple therapies. There's not a lot of data out there yet, but it seems logical that there probably are combinations, just like we see in oncology and other areas, that depending on biological subtypes that might work. But again, we need data. I think we're happy to see things like alemtuzumab does have an active comparator arm in the trial data, so you know that's helpful to us. But then it's not going to have a comparison to all the other existing agents. So it's good on one side and not so good on the other side.
And we've already seen that more choices haven't led to lower prices.
True.
Okay, so this was an exceptional peer exchange. Now let's get some final thoughts from each of you. We'll start with Dr. Fish.
I'm very excited to hear about some of the areas of research that the neurology community is going in with regards to both treatment and looking at the etiology, and I think it's the right direction.
Dr. Coil?
The era of disease-modifying therapies has been the major advance in neurology in our modern era, in my opinion. All the signs are that we're making meaningful, we know short-term and I believe long-term changes. I think early therapy, I do embrace that. I think with the expansion of what we're learning about MS, it's only a matter of time before we do have intelligent consensus paradigms of how best to treat this very bothersome disease. But it's an exciting time.
Dr. Owen?
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. It's an exciting time. I was around long before disease-modifying therapies, and these were patients who you could offer nothing. Now suddenly you have, lots of things to offer them that have changed lives. But that's come with a cost, and a cost that payers have had to reckon with. And it's created some tension between payers and pharmaceutical manufacturers, between payers and patients, and payers and clinicians. But it's the nature of what happens when you have revolutionary treatments that also have revolutionary costs associated with them.
That's very well put. So this is an extremely exciting time, and it's good that we have this problem, but now we have it and we need to solve it. But in terms of what we can do for patients with multiple sclerosis, it's been an extraordinary 20 years. Next week, Dr. Coyle and I are going to have a discussion where I'm going to talk about what MS care was in 1982. As opposed to the modern era, and it's just remarkable. And I was around for it, so it's been a remarkable change. I mean, a sea change in terms of the whole idea of neurotherapeutics. Very exciting, and I think we've gotten to some of the major challenges that we have to think about as we move forward. So, on behalf of our panel, we thank you for joining us, and hope you found our peer exchange informative. Thank you, everyone.